Ymedia.
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 Stay tuned with Ymedia.
Ymedia is a media company. With 360-degree approach in reaching the audience over 8 media platforms.
Hello and welcome to Ymedia's Editor's Take. I am Ramona Singh and it's great to be here with you today. We've had quite a turbulent week here in Canada. Essentially last week we were looking forward to this 50% tariffs that the Americans want to place on Canadian goods that are being exported to the United States, that it would not happen. I mean, I covered almost on a daily basis that our trade minister is in Washington, D.C. with our top trade negotiators, and they are trying to get a deal for Canada. And then we also heard very good news when we saw that the August 19th deadline was pushed forward by another 3 days. We heard from President Trump that there's almost going to be a deal. We even found out about the threshold of the 50% being brought down to 25% on certain key industries until a quota is met. So we thought, okay, things are going well. And then we went to sleep on that Friday night and we woke up on Saturday, August the 22nd, and we saw that, nope, the trade talks collapsed between the United States and Canada. And now there is a 50% tariff on Canadian goods that will be exported. Now, not all goods, specific industries. And then we heard the Prime Minister go on TV on Saturday morning and essentially announce Canada is in a trade war. Reporters asked him, is this really happening? And his quotes were, because we're attacked. Like, and these are his quotes, like you're at war when you get attacked, and we got attacked. And he was very firm to say there's going to be a dollar for dollar retaliation tariffs that will be placed, and that would be on September 8th. Days later, well, there was an announcement of dollar for dollar of tariffs on whether it was 50%, 25%, 15% of American goods, American-made goods coming into Canada. So this counter tariff on both sides, well, it begs the question, what does this mean for the economy? What does this mean for those industries that rely on our American partners? I mean, they take about 70 to 75% of Canadian goods. We're talking about over $3 billion cross the border of the Canada-United States every 24 hours. So that's a big deal. And what does it mean for the Canadian importers for bringing in American goods that will be subject to those tariffs? And the bigger question is, what does that mean for both you and I, the consumers? So today joining me is the group editor of Ymedia, Yudhvir Jaswal, who's going to break all this down for us. Hello and welcome.
Thank you so much, Ramona. It's always good to be here at Editor's Take. And today I think the topic is Ymedia Foreign Policy Report. And you're right. Thank you for giving us all that breakdown. You did mention, yes, the deadline, right before the deadline up until Tuesday evening, we do know this. Everything seemed pretty good because from the US side, they said, yeah, everything is good. From the Canadian side also, we did hear everything is good. The deal would be done. But then suddenly we know that the deal wasn't there. US has their own version. I did listen to them that the US had their own version. That yes, it was Canada who backed out of the deal. Jameson Greer, he was with the Canadian media. He was trying to explain that Canada has the best deal. Everything was fine. But then Minister Dominic LeBlanc, he went back. And then he then mentioned that, yes, they put in certain things at the last minute. But then on the Canadian side, we're hearing that it was US who did put certain things on the last minute. Then he also mentioned that, yes, the French language thing, the cultural aspect or the language aspect was not a deal breaker. And then Minister LeBlanc, he was optimistic that, yes, if that's the case, maybe we'll start the negotiations again. He was optimistic. And then on Thursday, as you just mentioned, President Trump, he changed the name from Lake Ontario to Lake America. So now that is where I think the trouble started. So I think if you look at the whole scenario now, there are no negotiations right now. And I think at this point, it'll be very challenging. I think at this point, it'll be very challenging how we'll move further, because now we've pulled out. Uh, Prime Minister Mark Carney, he's become the poster boy of resilience, or challenging the president. I don't think so any other country has done this. We have tariffs settled for China. We have tariffs settled for India, Indonesia, most parts of Europe, including England. And yes, we are in a very challenging times right now. We have imposed almost dollar to dollar tariffs. If they have imposed tariffs worth exports of 28 billion, from here also 27.3 billion. So it's almost close to 28 billion dollars. And we're not even in talks right now. So at this point, the situation is quite challenging. I've been using one word throughout this year, and when I'm borrowing this word, I read the reports for StatScan. I'll share that report which came out recently for our Canadian economy. If you would recall, we did an editor's take, and I discussed this, and I clearly remember that editor's take at that time was regarding the GDP, Canada's GDP at that time. And I clearly remember that, yes, when you were mentioning regarding Canada's GDP, at that time we're talking about technical recession. But I think that thing about technical recession, most of us, in media or in economists will use that. We could throw that in the trash bin right now. Why I'm saying this? Because the GDP numbers have been revised for first quarter. It's 0.3. It didn't shrink. It's an increase of 0.3% right now. So the first quarter, it's an increase of GDP. Second quarter, Canada has come roaring back 3.3%. So I still believe on an annual basis, I know the third quarter will be challenging. We're already in the third quarter. We don't know the numbers. The numbers for third quarter probably will come out sometime in October, or maybe probably in November. But I would think by the time we see the numbers for third quarter, it'll be a flat growth. We will see some challenges. And how this tariff war will play out, that's how we'll see the fourth quarter. But it's mostly going to be flat. I don't see much of a rise here. So I think overall the economy would grow. I gave you the number earlier as well. I'll give you the number today again. My prediction is for 2026, the numbers would come out somewhere in February or March. But when we will hit 2027 February or March, the annualized growth will still be, I would say, 1.7% to 2.5%. That's my assumption, 1.75 to 2.5% by the time this year ends. I know there are many variables here. And the question that we're asking today, who will win this trade war, US or Canada? Short term, there will be losses for sure, job losses. We could take 0.5% or a 1% hit in the economy this year just because of US, but we'll still end up at 1.75 to 2.5. But in the long run, I think these are the times when I think Canada has been shaken up. We are diversifying our trade at this time, and then with that said, I think I was there recently in downtown, and I had an opportunity to meet many people from the financial industry. And I heard the press conference at the Fairmont Royal York. Our colleague Shubi also asked a question there, and the clear answer was, "This is Plan A." So what? So you know what? If I go back a few months earlier, Prime Minister Mark Carney and his cabinet colleagues, whenever we would interview them or talk to them or meet them, their point was that yes, we are going to diversify non-US exports. The focus was on non-US exports. We are going to diversify trade. That was their talking points. Now I think the talking point that Mark Carney and his cabinet colleagues is very clear. This was always Plan A, to diversify the trade. So now they're not saying it's only because of US, because my colleague Shubi, when he asked the question his question was at the Fairmont Royal Orchid. The question was very clear. Is it because of the US pressure? We are really now, it's a sense of urgency. We are doing this trade deal with India, China, and other countries in Europe and Asia and in South America and Latin America as well. So he clearly emphasized, no, this is Plan A. So now Prime Minister Mark Carney, Industry Minister Melanie Joly, same talking point. This is Plan A. Plan A is, what is Plan A? Plan A is to diversify the trade. And then when I went to, then there was another meeting at Hilton. So at Hilton, I got an opportunity to meet both our finance minister, Francois Philippe Champagne, and India's finance minister, Nirmala Sitharamanji. She was also there as well. And at the Hilton, it was not only to meet both the finance ministers over there, but also I listened to what our finance minister, Francois Philippe Champagne, had to share over there. Listen to what India's finance minister Nirmala Sitharamanji she had to share over there, and the message was clear, and we had around 400 people there in this reception. These were leaders from major banks. There were leaders from insurance industry. You name a bank, the representatives and the senior leaders were there, including CEOs of the banks were there, including the senior management as the bank investment sector. They were all there. This 4 and 5. So I got an opportunity to listen to all those. What this tariff means, who's going to win the trade war, what are they? So if there is one word again, that I listen from that entire room, these are all financial heads, and we can give them some credit because I was just reading the reports for all the major banks. Unexpected returns for all major banks. From BMO, TD's opening 100 new branches in US. They said unexpected returns. So their quarterly returns are amazing. So all these financial minds, when I listen to them, when I talk to them about the Canada and US trade thing, they're all very bullish. They're all very optimistic that yes, we will face challenges, but Canada is quite resilient. Yes.
Those are great points. Now, I want to backtrack a little bit to really explain why we're here today, right? And really, I want to take your, opinion on what you think led to this situation today. So essentially, President Trump invoked Section 338 of the Tariff Act of 1930. It's not really used, but this is an act that essentially puts a tariff on countries that treat United States unfairly when it comes to trade. And so he used this specific section to say, you know what, there is the ability to have a tariff of up to 50%. So he put the max amount 50%. Now, there's some interesting facts, right? So prior to President Trump doing that, the latest stats were that when it came to American alcohol on Canadian shelves, so American alcohol exports to Canada dropped by 81%. And if you want to know what the dollar value for that is, it's about $718 million. And so it went from $718 million to current day $137 million. And majority of those alcohol imports from the United States went to Saskatchewan and Alberta, essentially. Okay, so that's where you had it. Ontario removed it completely from the shelves. So there's that. The president said that's one of the reasons. The second thing is American-made cars dropped 22%. So this is exports, American vehicle exports into Canada. So import into Canada dropped 22%, which is a total value of about $5.6 billion. So the president says, hey, this is unfair. So now I can impose this measure of the 50% tariff, right? So then and what you're seeing there, I should probably explain the imagery that you're seeing. That is the G7. There you have President Trump who's sitting at a table and, you can see he's there by himself and it was on a break. And then you see Prime Minister Mark Carney lean over and speak to him. Now, we had our colleague there at the G7 covering everything, and therefore we got a hot mic moment there where the Prime Minister is confirming the Chinese EVs that will come to Canada because of the trade trade agreements that Canada has with China, and that there's going to be a cap. So you take that into consideration. You take the fact that they did not have a scheduled meeting, but the Prime Minister said they spoke about 8 times for a few minutes, and that was probably one of them. And then when you look at the fact that when it comes to American-made vehicles, it dropped by 22% in terms of import into Canada. Now, there's also the Canadian tariff that was imposed about 25% on U.S. vehicles. So you have this thing in the background before, and many things that led up to it before you have the president that says, okay, I'm going to impose this 50% tariff, which then there was negotiations taking place, right? And then a couple other things that they said was a key issue was essentially wanting access to the Canadian dairy industry. We have our supply management here, where we protect our dairy industry. We cap it, in terms of what it's being sold for. So you have that aspect, and then then the American alcohol issue was a massive one, and then there was the French language, the Canadian culture aspect, and that was another contentious issue with a couple of more things, but those were really essentially what was highlighted. Now, I want to ask you, was there anything else to consider why we ended up here? I mean, I recall when President Trump won his second term, he had his inauguration, and then immediately in the Oval Office, he talks about Canada and a 25% tariff, and then Canada being a 51st state before he even had his inauguration, calling back then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Governor Trudeau. Just a few days ago, he said Governor Carney. And so, and then there's been, of course, the strong momentum of Buy Canada, right? Even though President Trump campaigned on America first, Canada has really started this Canada First movement and, support Canada, buy from Canada. And so aside from the latest numbers that I shared with you about why he perhaps wanted to do this 50% tariff on Canada, what other reasons could have been there for us to get a better understanding of what caused this? So now we can figure out what is next, right? So we need to have that foundation discussed, I think.
Yeah, great question, Ramonaji. I think, you're absolutely right. If we have to tackle what's coming our way, you're right, we need to understand, we need to take a step back. How did we end up here? I think probably, I would say when President Trump lost in the presidential elections in 2020. So they did start planning. I'm sure they had their core group. It would start planning for Trump's comeback. It was not by himself that he came back. So now this core groups wanted to address few issues. I know it was a historic comeback. Very rarely you would see that. So when President Trump and his core group might have started planning the comeback, I'm sure they would have had a plan. They would have there would be some method to this madness that we're witnessing right now. They must be, planning something that once we're back on the presidential chair, what do we have to accomplish? So President Trump, I think, once he came back, he was all set with that plan. He wanted to leave some sort of legacy that, yes, this is what we have accomplished. Why did we come back? And choosing that legacy, that President Trump, one of the things is, yes, they would challenge the major powers. One of the things that we wanted to establish again is, okay, what's the slogan again? Let's make America great. How are they going to make America great? Challenge the powers who are on the rise, whether it's China. Russia is on the decline, but still with Russia-Ukraine war still lingering on. So how do we tackle that Russia-Ukraine war? Challenge Russia, challenge China's economic and military and tech rise. All the three aspects, they're on the rise. And then, of course, whoever has been, this was their belief that whoever has been taking advantage of US, so, they should toe our line. Their foreign policy should be dictated by us, whether it's the European nations. From Germany to France, these are major economies, to England. They haven't spent that much on the GDP dollars, on the defense budget. The defense budget US has been requesting. This is not now. US has been requesting for a while now. Please increase your defense budget. So they have not been doing that. They wanted the defense budgets to be 5% of GDP. Many of the countries didn't do that, including Canada. Now we've reached our 2% target of our GDP. So and most of the times when you listen Trump talking about President Trump, when he talks about Canada, he would mention, even recently he's mentioned, oh, you didn't spend much on your military. So that is precisely the reason. We're seeing here in Canada, but look at this. Trump tried, okay, it was like 50% tariff, 75, 100, 150% tariffs against China. At one point, China stopped responding. India's trade deal. We've been in discussions, India's trade deal should have been done at the beginning of this year. And then what we witnessed. There was a massive clash between India and US as well. So it's not just Canada. I'll come to Canada as well. It's with almost every other country. Trump rolling out a red carpet for Russian President Vladimir Putin in Alaska, and he gets the presidential limo ride, and then what did it? Nothing came out of it. So at the BRICS summit, all three leaders were together. You had China, you had India, and India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi holding Putin's hand in one hand, and then Xi Jinping. This is Modi and all three leaders standing like this. And when President Trump was asked, "Were you watching what was happening at BRICS?" So President Trump acknowledged. He said, "Yeah, I was watching that on TV." And now there's another BRICS summit happening in India. you know, Xi Jinping doesn't travel much. Putin would come to India. Now, this BRICS summit will have Xi Jinping with a huge contingent going to India. So he's returning the favor which Modi did last year. And again, all eyes will be on India. In India, you have the BRICS summit, Putin, Xi Jinping. Modi is the host there. You have all those BRICS other countries. South Africa, he doesn't get along well with them as well. South Africa is part of BRICS. Iran wants to apply. Maybe you'll have some representation from Iran as well, and US is against them. So they so now out of all those countries, oh, Canada, how can Canada even dare to ask any question? And when we went against war with Iran, you had Europe saying this is not our war. Canada didn't toe the line, so we were left to fight against Iran by ourselves. Ourselves means, okay, Israel was there, but it was mainly Israel's war. It was not even US war. So Canada doesn't understand. And then, all these things happening one after the other. And then came the Davos speech, the rupture. The rupture. Before Trudeau even left, as the liberal leader or as the prime minister, he didn't challenge much. Of course, when he knew, okay, I'm leaving, that is the time former Prime Minister Trudeau would start spilling out the beans. And when he started saying, you know what, he wasn't treated well when he was there at the Mar-a-Lago resort. He wasn't treated well in his conversations with the president. That's the time he started talking very openly. And then here comes Prime Minister Carney. And even Trudeau mentioned the same thing. That relationship that we had with US is over. But Trudeau was mentioning it's over, the rupture, and Trudeau was only talking for himself. That's a stark contrast here. Former Prime Minister Trudeau was only talking for himself and Canada. But you know what? At the world stage in Davos, when you have the whole corporate world, the political world, the who's who are watching you, this guy, our Prime Minister wakes up early in the morning, writes his own speech for 2 hours, goes on the world stage, and he talks about rupture. He talks about standing up against Trump. No other prime minister has done that. Of course, there are issues with China, Russia, India, Iran, many other countries, South Africa, but no other prime minister has really stood up uh, as against Trump as Prime Minister Mark Carney is doing. Listen to him. I mean, he's not even in India and US are in continuous talks. Jameson Greer, he talks there quite frequently. Then we have discussions going on. It's not like a rupture. But now this guy, our Prime Minister Mark Carney, he's pulled back Dominic LeBlanc's. There are no dates set, let alone having a deal. There are no dates set. So I think this strategy for US, with due respect, I'm saying, against Russia it has not gone to fruition as per their planning. China isn't listening to US. India, President Trump has clearly said Modi is very. He was asked in an interview, who is the best negotiator? He said Modi. Modi is by far the best negotiator. And it's not just Modi, it's Piyush Goyal. I had a front row seat here at least 4 events with India's Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal, which is equivalent to our trade minister. We call it the trade minister in India, they call it the commerce minister. So he's very sharp. He's very sharp. I listened to his discussion. So it's very difficult to negotiate with Piyush Goyal or with India or Modi, if you want to name him. But I think we should give some credit to the bureaucrats and the commerce minister also, and of course we can give credit to Modi as well. So Trump isn't getting his way around against any of these countries: China, Russia, South Africa, Iran, for that matter, Israel also, for that matter. They have their differences with Israel as well. So in Canada, he's trying to get something out of Canada. When Trudeau was in power, he's still trying to get something when Carney's in power. So Of course, we have to protect our interest. And I think this time the sticky point became the auto industry. The medium and big size SUVs, they didn't want to be part of this bargain. They didn't want to put that there. But Canada, we would be losing a lot if we do that. And when we asked, and then also there was another aspect. Another aspect was it was clearly Prime Minister Mark Carney. He didn't mince his words at the press conference. I clearly saw a journalist because when we were in that press conference, a journalist said, "Why can I see Mark Carney is at war?" So the question could have been, why am I seeing Canada is at war or Canada is in a trade war? Why is our Prime Minister Mark Carney seems to be in sort of a trade war or a war? No, 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 no. The question was, why am I seeing this? Mark Carney is at war. So, you know, these are all very different things. So we have to read between the lines here. Why did the journalist ask this question? And Prime Minister Mark Carney, he replied. I mean, he didn't say no. Canada is at war or it's a trade war. It's not a war. So Prime Minister Mark Carney, he said, yeah, when you're being attacked, you have to defend yourself. So it's Mark Carney who's become a poster boy, not only leading Canada's war, but also resilience or someone standing up against Trump, which he didn't expect. That's why, what has got this to do, striking Lake Ontario? Okay, I mean, this Lake Ontario has been there. The name has been there for 400 years, even before U.S. declared independence, or even Canada, the present, state that we see Canada is in. No, I mean, what are we trying to achieve over here? Oh, Lake Ontario. No, no, we're going to call it Lake America. So yeah, that's the challenge here. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. And when it comes to what the prime minister said is there, one of the reporters asked him at that famous press conference now,
Yeah.
August 22nd, Saturday morning, you wake up, you see your prime minister is on TV and addressing that there's going to be 50% tariffs on electronics, electrical equipment, chemicals, plastics, furniture, wood products, steel, aluminum, lumber, and automobiles that face the additional pressure on duties that get layered and layered, so that you have that happening, and that CUSMA doesn't cover this because these tariffs are under an act that's not, going to be safe under CUSMA. And then we also know that this was a greater talk for CUSMA because now CUSMA was not renewed. The July 1st deadline came of that 6-year review period. So just a refresher, we had NAFTA in President Trump's first term, and then he scrapped NAFTA, and then we had CUSMA, and that was signed on July 1st, 2020. There was a clause in there that there's going to be a 6-year review period. So that made it 2026, July 1st. And if all parties, meaning Mexico, Canada, United States, agreed to it, then it would be renewed for 16 years. July 1st deadline came, and the president said he's not interested in renewing it. So what that means is CUSMA is still in effect, but that now means that we go into an annual review period. And as you know, as any business owner knows, if they don't know from one year to the next if there's going to be tariffs on their industries, they can't really plan to grow their business. They can't plan staffing. They can't plan productions. And so it's very significant. And when it comes to investors, foreign investors that want to invest in Canada, then it's when it's unreliable to know if it's a safe place to invest capital, because I mean, business is for profit and they're looking for a return on those investments. If you're talking about 25 to 50% tariffs, that's very significant. That can't get passed down to maybe the consumer when you're working on very thin margins. So you have that, which this conversation was supposed to create the way for the bigger conversation about CUSMA. So here you have it. And then there was a question from a reporter saying, was it Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick that came in last minute? Jameson Greer is doing the negotiations with our trade minister, Dominic LeBlanc, and Janice Charest, the top negotiator, and things seem to be going well. And then you have this thing that people were saying that, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick came last minute and and asked for too much. And that's where you had Prime Minister Mark Carney say, they asked for too much, and we just couldn't do it. And then the Prime Minister did not respond to it, but said, the Canadian team were all on the same page. The Americans were not so much. And then interestingly enough, President Trump comes out 2 days ago and says, yeah, there were some last minute things that the US did put in there. So the president did confirm, because prior to the president confirming that, it was like a he said, she said story. Canada said, America said story about why there was a collapse, because there was repercussions from industries, from provinces, and on the American side, from industries and from states. And so that was a massive thing. And then they both were, saying it was the other country's fault. So now we know that, yes, something did happen. And then there's also the famous thing of, Trump taco, that he does U-turns. When something's not that popular, he does a U-turn on it. And so there's, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, he's saying, you know what, Trump's going to do a taco U-turn and this is going to subside. So do you think there's a possibility before the September 8th start of tariffs on the United States, there's items from 50%, 25%, 15%, which will apply on metals? Seafood's now removed after Canada spoke to the industries. They removed seafood on the list of American seafood that would come here. So that's no longer on the tariff list, but now it's metals, clothing, household appliance, electronic devices, and those have to be made in America. So manufactured in America, or really transformed mostly in America. And so that is the thing. Then there's also $7.5 billion in new and expanded support measures that the government's going to do with federal assistance for those industries that are going to be hard hit. So now I can't even say there's going to be a winner in all this, because both sides will take a hit when it comes to the average worker, the average business owner who's trying to grow their industry, grow their business, create jobs. And then of course, with certain industries where there's not enough margin, then they have to shut their doors. And when you talking about massive tariffs like this, it gets passed on to the consumer. And we're already in an energy crisis with this ongoing 6 months conflict with Iran and the Strait of Hormuz being closed, which affects 20% of exports of oil and gas into the world. And so you have those impacts of our gas prices going up. It's contributing to transportation costs. It contributes to our prices of food at the grocery store. And then that overall contributes to our inflation numbers that we see rising. So you have that. And then this tariff war, it's just seems devastating, with projections of economists saying it might be, we're talking about triple digits, well, 6-digit numbers of job losses potentially, people shutting down. So do you think that there's a hope that there could be a deal before the September 8th where, Canada goes into the retaliatory tariffs? And in the meantime, because President Trump did admit, it was the Americans. And then the other new thing is they removed Canadian content. So French language is no longer a contentious issue on trade. And so that was removed. So that seemed like a concession the Americans made. And then Trump also saying, no, it was really us. So I want to know your take, or are they really going to go ahead with this tariff war on both sides? Because there'll be no winner. There'll be no winner.
You're absolutely right. Everyone knows this. I don't think so. The Americans are ignorant about it. They know this too, that there are going to be no winners. We did put this headline, who will win the trade war, but there are no winners. Yeah, that's the exact answer. I think in Advertise Take, you already gave this exact answer. There are going to be no winners. And you're right. The irony of the situation is it'll be the consumers, who are going to pay on both sides of the fence. So that's one thing. That's an answer. But to your next point, will we see anything happening anytime soon? The backdoor diplomacy channels are always on. I'm sure there will be a backdoor diplomacy channel on right now between Dominic LeBlanc and Jamison Greer. So they would be talking, at least there is a staffers would be talking right now to try and discuss something. Of course, Prime Minister Mark Carney, and President Trump, they will be posturing in a different way that, yeah, okay, no talks right now. President Trump will say, oh, this is where we stand. Canadians are ripping us off. and all those statements that we are witnessing. And on this side of the border, there are some political compulsions as well. So we all know that yes, uh, Mark Carney positioned himself that yes, I'll be getting a good trade deal, and I have I'm an interview scheduled with the leader of opposition. He's coming to our Channel Y studios, Pierre Poilievre, where I'm sure he's also looking for this opportunity to ask where is the trade deal. And to your question that you asked earlier, how did we end up here? Why did the deal didn't go through? The Canadians need transparency over here. So all these things will keep on happening. And you're right, the seafood aspect, yeah, and actually the seafood industry, they welcome the decision as well. And regarding the French thing, you've already mentioned that. But I think most importantly, we have to understand three things over here which are at play. Number one, of course, the political thing is at play. Both both the leaders, they're answerable to their domestic audience. So it's not just about trade or the sovereignty. I'll talk about the sovereignty part as well. There are many articles written, regarding it's not just about trade, it's about sovereignty as well. I'll talk about trade and sovereignty also, but you know more than me. You've been yeah, you've been covering political affairs a lot. You've been very actively involved in the political affairs in US and Canada, so you know it more than me. Yes, the political aspect will be at play. President Trump, the midterms are approaching. What is he going to take to his voters? We didn't. I mean, here is a Prime Minister of Canada. We were calling them, the Governor Trudeau, Governor Carney, and 51st state, and here they are standing up against us. So, and the Democrats will definitely make a classic case out of it. That yes, under President Trump, they were talking of let's make America great again. The Ukraine-Russia war is still lingering on. Iran, we have entered ourselves into a deadlock there with the Iran thing going on, and trade deals aren't working. I mean, what have we really achieved? The midterms are very important. He doesn't want to be a lame duck president after the midterms, and the initial polls or whatever indications we have over here. There's a massive challenge. So President Trump will definitely want something before the midterms to go to the voters. I'm not saying it's just Canada, but yeah, Canada. Right now, I mean, I was reading. You look at the New York Times, because as a group editor, I try to read the international media. I mean, look at New York Times right now. You know what's the headline in New York Times? Canada has had enough of Trump. That's the headline, New York Times. And of course, Trump can, President Trump can always say, "Oh, New York." I mean, so he calls out reporters like this. Oh, who are you? Where are you from? Oh, CNN, fake news. Oh, New York Times. Oh, your newspaper, it's over. It's gone. The BBC, look at the headline, what BBC is saying, Mark Carney. Oh, I was thinking, as much as Mark Carney has become the poster boy, but when BBC, Bloomberg, New York Times, CNN, they put his picture there, and BBC and all, they say, oh, this guy is standing up against President Trump, he's become the poster boy across the globe, across the media, across international media. And I'm sure as much as President Trump is busy with his own, Truth Social, but I'm sure he reads all these newspaper. Everything would be brought at his White House desk. So it'll be challenging for Trump as well, and the political rhetoric that we are hearing right now. Um, I think Mark Carney knows one thing for sure. He's been, let's give him some credit as well. He's been the central banker for Canada and the central banker for, he headed the Bank of England as well. How many individuals have you seen who's been heading two central banks in Canada and in England? So he knows his stuff. He knows right now it's going to be challenging. There will be job losses in the auto sector. Uh, Aluminum, with aluminum, we are supplying more than 50%. It's actually, to be precise, it's 52% of the aluminum that you see in States. We supply that. Steel, almost good 20%, 25%. A quarter, of the steel that is being used in US, we supply that. And when you talk about aluminum, from building houses to building an aircraft, it's used all over. Our steel is being used all over. Then of course, there was discussion in Canada, and I don't think so. It's a good idea right now to escalate things at that level when we're talking of energy or oil. With the Keystone XL pipeline, most of it flows down south, and they have their refineries. The tar sand oil that we produce, they're ideally suited to refine that. Not many refineries can do that. But of course, we're building the Trans Mountain pipeline towards the west, and we're going to build more pipelines there on those lines, the Trans Mountain pipeline, and we are going. And the deal that I was. Again, I'll go back to the discussions that I saw. I was there at the front row when Commerce Minister Piyush Goyal was here, and he was meeting everyone. He met our Prime Minister, he met our Energy Minister Tim Hodgson. So Piyush Goyal met so many business leaders, and then I saw Minister Nirmala Sitharaman. So here I am. This was a tech meeting there. Minister Piyush Goyal was here, so we were heading towards. You see the Ambassador Dinesh Patnaik in the background. I've had many meetings with the ambassador as well. He was there when Modi met Prime Minister Karni, and then Minister Piyush Goyal. This was a tech meeting. So there's a lot of discussion, whenever this question comes up, are we really going to have a $70 billion bilateral trade? I think so. I asked this question to Minister Piyush Goyal as well. And even yesterday, if you see, we had the same discussion with Minister Nirmala Sitharaman and Minister François-Philippe Champagne yesterday. The same discussion, So what do you think? Are we really would we really be able to achieve the 70 billion? I mean, when we talk 70 billion, it's Canadian 70 billion. It's 50 billion in terms of US dollars. I think we would be able to do that. And now this is the new strategy. So I would say, as much as it's a short-term pain, but in the long run, Canada stands to gain. And once again, I'll say this: Canada. I see Canada as becoming a global power. I clearly see that. In case we all get together, we get our act together, and I like your thing. I mean, it was used in COVID as well. We're all in it together. Yes, we're all in it together, and I think if we make the right moves right now, and I clearly see this Prime Minister Mark Carney, all his cabinet ministers, one-liner that they're using. Earlier it was, oh, we are increasing our non-US exports. When we interviewed François-Philippe Champagne, the same three ministers. I haven't recently met Minister Anita Anand recently, but whenever I would meet or talk on air, off the air, Minister Champagne, I think in the last 6 months, I've met him probably 6 or 7 times in different places. So Minister Champagne is all about this thing. And by the way, I must at this time, if I can take 10 seconds to give credit to our Ymedia team, at the G7 summit, there were 18 journalists over there. And I must give this credit to Ymedia team. There were only 5 questions allowed, and Ymedia got a chance at the G7 summit in France to ask that question, and probably the answer was one of the longest ones. And recently, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne and Minister Anita Anand, right after the press conference was finished, Ymedia we got the first question. Then it was Global News. Then it was CBC. I know there were others as well, but then they just stopped. They said, no, thank you. I mean, India's one of the biggest newspaper. The rep was there waiting since morning. He didn't get a chance. Of course, there were many other mainstream media journalists here as well. They didn't get a chance, but Ymedia got the first question. It was the first question. Okay, Ymedia, go ahead. So, and then Global News, then CBC News, and there were others as well. So I'm just also thanking the entire Ymedia team, including you, Ramona ji. You do a fantastic job. Shubi does a fantastic job. Gurpreet ji, the team does a fantastic job of covering. And we are at the forefront. We get these questions from our audience that, China gets a good coverage if any of the delegations are here. Why doesn't it? I said, no, absolutely not. I had a group, who are originally from China recently at our studios, and they were saying, our foreign minister came, I said, yeah, I know because I cover media, but the mainstream media didn't bother. The Chinese foreign minister was here. I'm sure not many would know that. So I said, even China doesn't get that much of a coverage. Canadian media, mainly, I would say, is focused on Canada. Okay, US, with due respect, just as Canada is realizing this thing, I've been listening this since Paul Martin. Then comes Harper. Oh, we have to diversify our trade. But that hasn't really happened. Similarly, it's not just our leaders need to realize, and I think they're realizing this the hard way, Canada needs to diversify trade. But since we're in media, you're also in media, and this is an editor's take. My editor's take on media is also, we need to look beyond as well. We need to look beyond Canada, we need to look beyond. US, we need to look beyond. There's the whole world exists in Asia. I mean, um, the power balance, uh, and particularly the trade balance and the tech balance is pivoting towards Asia at a much faster pace than we could ever imagine. And the top five economies, if you see, I mean, Japan was already there in the top five, but then in the top five, China is there now, India is there now, and I'm sure China and India will be they're in the top three very shortly. So when you have in the top three, you have two countries from Asia. It's not just the leaders, not just the investors who need to start looking beyond. It's the media also. It needs to start looking beyond Canada and US. To your earlier point, I think you're right. You made a good point earlier regarding the investors. I was there at this place in Hilton yesterday and was talking to there were many big companies, from India as well. So because India's finance minister was there, it was a sold out event, amazing event, I must say that. And there were CEOs of the banks, CEO of the insurance companies there. So in the yesterday's event, I did ask this question to many of the companies. Yes, you're right. I mean, they're not really cynical, but they are asking this question, and definitely this question should be asked. And many of the countries would see Canada as an entry point to U.S. markets as well. So here we have an investor summit in about a few days now, and we have a trade war going on. So yes, one thing which the investors may not like is uncertainty. But I still think with Mark Carney's, I'm using a word, with Mark Carney's charm and his knowledge, and Mark Carney being at the helm of the affairs, and given his background, I'm pretty sure the investor summit will go fine. I did talk to the people who are leading this thing. I was there at an event at Toronto Stock Exchange. Invest Canada is leading all this. And I did have a chance to talk to her about, how this Invest Canada Summit is panning out. So this was a couple of weeks ago, before this trade war really escalated to the level that we see. But they were quite confident. They said, yeah, I mean, it's almost going to be a packed event, the Investor Summit that's happening in the second week of September. Prime Minister Mark Carney, he's lining up some trade investors, and there'll be investors from all over Europe, Asia, and other continents as well. Yeah, Ramona ji.
Yeah, those are excellent points. And I like how you brought up the political aspect of things. And I really want to dig into that, if I
Please,
may. So
please.
when it comes to America and Canada in this trade war that we're at now, Prime Minister Mark Carney's political career was made because of President Trump, right? Essentially, him winning his second term really started the offset of the dialogue changing when he called Canada the 51st state, or when he called, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Governor Trudeau. Really, it created the moment for Prime Minister Mark Carney, being a private citizen. Yes, he was governor of the Bank of Canada and governor of the Bank of England, but he was never a politician. He was never, a school board trustee or a counselor or a mayor or an MPP or a premier for that matter, or an MP. And there he is, he becomes prime minister, wins the leadership, a liberal leadership, and becomes prime minister after Justin Trudeau stepped down. Then he goes into a general election months, weeks later, and wins the general election against Pierre Poilievre, who was suited to take over and become the next prime minister, with his poll numbers very high, over 20 points from Justin Trudeau for previously 2 years. So essentially, Mark Carney's era of politics and him being a politician, and no less than being the prime minister of Canada, really started because of Trump's rhetoric on Canada. And we saw that during that general election, that Carney's poll numbers went up. The Liberals came back. I mean, there were so many Liberal MPs that weren't going to run an election again because they saw the writing on the wall with the poll numbers. And then you had Mark Carney come in, become prime minister, and there was energy. And many of them said, okay, fine, we'll run another term. And we saw the Liberals come back with their numbers, and consistently he's been doing well. But when he did well during that general election was when he was doing the tariff negotiations and really trying to stand up for Canada. And that really send up his numbers. And we're seeing that again right now, even though the trade talks collapsed and he said, hey, it was the United States. Now the United States, the president has confirmed, yes, we asked a few things last minute. And then one thing he talked about is the French language rights as a critical issue of the Canadian culture, which was part of the trade negotiations that were taking place with the Americans essentially not wanting to abide by the French language stuff. That's been a massive hit. When you think about the fact that August 31st, there's 3 by-elections that are taking place, federal by-elections in Canada, one being North Vancouver, that was a Liberal seat, so it'll probably be another Liberal seat. It'll be expected to be, let's see. And then you have Beaches East York, that was also a Liberal seat. And so let's see if it's going to be a safe Liberal seat. Now, what's interesting is there's now a Quebec federal by-election, and that is in Chicoutimi, Laforge, and that was a Conservative MP that the Prime Minister appointed to a senator, essentially went to that riding in Quebec, made a Conservative MP into a senator, and then created an open seat, is running it into a by-election. And this is just days before this federal by-election when this prime minister won on his trade negotiations with the United States when it comes to French language rights as being part of Canadian culture that he's not willing to make any concessions on. That's massive. And those are massive political points to win yet another seat. So this is not a floor crossing from the Conservatives because he appointed that Conservative MP to a senator, which gives him 25 years as a senator. And so now this riding in Chicoutimi, Laforge in Quebec, it was expected to go 3 ways. It was expected to go with the Bloc Québécois, which is a party based in Quebec, or Conservatives, which it was a Conservative seat. And now the Liberals are making such a go at it, and the Prime Minister is winning points on this. So those are massive, massive things when it comes to this politics of things. And then when you look at the other side of the border, with what President Trump's doing, you're right. There is, the midterm elections just in November around the corner, and things have become more expensive. He still hasn't been able to explain to Americans why he went to war with Iran and what the objective is with Iran right now. We're not hearing about regime change anymore, which was the onset of this. We're not hearing about nuclear activities in terms of Iran having enriched uranium. We're not really hearing about this. Now we're hearing about the Strait of Hormuz and who is going to be the authority of that waterway, which controls 20% of the world's oil and gas exports through that very slim waterway. That's what the conversation's at. And then Americans are thinking, well, wait a minute, our gas prices have gone up significantly. It's affecting American farmers who are before harvest season, who are paying an extremely high price when it comes to diesel. So many different industries are being impacted. This trade war with Canada isn't going to go so well. Like, when it comes to steel, aluminum, all that, yes, it impacts the construction sector, and so much more when it comes to this domino effect. So is the president's little wins going to be changing the name of Lake Ontario? And will people abide by it? Does it really make a difference? Is he looking for just small wins compared to what the greater thing is? But when you look at Prime Minister Mark Carney's win with the Canadian public on what he's been able to do, stand up to President Trump. After President Trump took office for the second term, we all watched because everybody got 25% tariffs or more. And then there you had back then Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, go into the Oval Office, Keir Starmer, and show up with flattery and do a deal for 10%. And so then the world took notes, said, okay, so if you want to get better tariffs or maybe no tariffs at all, you should lead with flattery. You should, extend, the olive branch over and over again. But then what was the difference there is we know that President Trump loves the royal family. He has an affinity for the royal family. So when you had King Charles III rolled a red carpet out and have a state visit for him, and maybe that was the sweet deal of why he made that trade agreement with the United Kingdom, reduced, the tariffs, and they did that deal. Now, that doesn't necessarily translate to the other countries, which we're now realizing that, hey, maybe flattery isn't going to get you better terms into the world's biggest market, the United States, the world's biggest market, the world's biggest GDP. Every country, every business wants to sell into the United States. Canada has an integrated supply chain management, manufacturing with the United States, thinking it's impossible that we're not gonna, we're gonna have this scenario. So here you have it where we saw flattery worked for the United Kingdom, state visit worked for the United Kingdom, but that is particular to them. For Canada, Canada's showing something far different about standing up to the president, and the president even caving in on the concession on the French language rights, as well as now admitting to what's taken place about the last minute input. But what this has done, even though Prime Minister Mark Carney, whose political career has been made on Trump's second term, he did not get a deal for Canada. The 50% tariffs are on, but because he stood up, his poll numbers are through the roof. And in a few days, we're going to have 3 by-elections. And okay, we can give him North Vancouver. It was already a Liberal seat. We can give him Beaches East York. It was already a Liberal seat. But this Chicoutimi-Laforge seat, that was a Conservative seat that he opened up himself to appoint a Conservative MP to become a senator, and then he's having a by-election there, and it was supposed to be a split between the Conservatives, the Liberals, and the Bloc Québécois, and his numbers are through the roof, and he's won on the French language rights, and this is for Quebec. So he's winning with Canada. At least that's what I could say for the moment.
Yeah, those are some very good points, and I knew that you would be bringing up all this, and you're right, because you cover political affairs more than anybody else here. Especially Canada and US. You're in the thick of things. You know how the politics comes into play. Of course, as we said, at the front and center, it's trade. Of course, it's trade that we're talking about, but then there is politics at play, and then there's talk about the sovereignty aspect as well. A lot of ink has been written with the word sovereignty. It's not about trade, it's about sovereignty. Yes, it's about sovereignty. Yes, it's about trade at the front and center. But you're right, there's a lot about the politics as well. And you just mentioned flattery. Yes, that's a currency that works with Trump. The other thing that you mentioned, the royal, he likes going into palaces and all that. The recent summit in France, the final day, they just wanted everything to be okay at the G7 summit. They didn't want things to blow up. That was the only thing. Like the G7 summit, if you ask me, what did we really get out of the G7 summit? Our colleague Shubi was there. Of course, we covered a lot of stuff. But was there anything substantial? No. I mean, what did we get out of it? The only thing that I was seeing is that, yes, the European countries, and in particularly the host country, France, they wanted to make sure that things don't blow up when Trump is there. So, okay, on the last day, you have there's a palace, there's dinner, there's flattery, there's the royal aspect, as you just mentioned, that got involved. So all these things, somehow they made sure that, yes, we don't, everything is done in a nice way. But I'll just mention one point over here. Yes, of course, US is, I mean, the import and the exports that we do right now, I mean, which are the major countries that we export to? The countries that we were trying now to increase our trade, I mean, India is not there in the top 10 in terms of export or even import right now. So China is there in the top 5, but there will be challenges. I mean, up until now, we were imposing almost 100% tariffs in line with the US. So that's another point of discussion. US now wants, okay, let's talk specifically for a minute about the EVs right now. So US has been imposing almost 100% tariffs on EV vehicles from China. US, that's what US policy has been. Canada also imposed about 100% tariffs on EV vehicles. India does a similar thing, not the same exactly 100%. I'll talk about the details how India imposes closer to 100% tariffs on EV vehicles. But then Canada changed that tariff from almost 100% to maybe 5, 7, 6, even less than 10%, but they capped it to 50,000 vehicles. So who knows, tomorrow it'll be 50,000 or it could be 100,000, the consumer definitely stands to benefit. So US wanted to have this discussion. When Jameson Greer was asked, in this deal, you all, because I want to bring the discussion back to trade as well. I know the political aspect is very important. I know the other things that you're discussing, the sovereignty or flat free, all those are very important things. But at the end, I mean, Pakistan has learned its lesson the hard way. Pakistan has lesson learned, with due respect, I'm saying, learned the lesson. And you're right that even many countries realize this. Yeah, you could do whatever, with Trump at the end of the day, the flat free, the galas and the banquet halls, the royal palaces. But at the end of the day, it is the trade which will matter. Pakistan did all that. Flattery. Oh, we're giving you Nobel Prize for Peace. We're nominating you. The prime minister stands up and, there are only two countries nominating President Trump for Nobel Prize, Israel and Pakistan. So I think uh, Pakistan doesn't even recognize Israel. They don't. You can't have on your passport. It's clearly written you can't travel with this travel document to Israel. And here are two countries together in the same frame, standing up. Their prime minister standing up. Oh, here we are. Trump, sir, you're nominated for Nobel Prize for Peace. So, and when you had the summit in Egypt, Sharm el Sheikh, you have Pakistan's prime minister standing in behind, and he calls in the front, and he gives a long speech. After Pakistan's prime minister's long speech, President Trump, he says, I don't, I don't think so. I need to say anything right now after Prime Minister Trump. I think I need to go back home. So that, and then he says, oh, he looks at, oh, where is this, President Carney? Or where is this President, that was Keir Stammer? So, here is okay. And Keir Stammer was standing behind. So all these are lining up behind him, Keir Stammer and, Prime Minister of Pakistan, the President LCC of Egypt, all these are lining behind Trump. What are they getting out of it? No deal with Iran, nothing. So I think at the end of the day, we all have to realize, that yes, at the heart is the issue with trade. So I want to focus and come back on the trade aspect once again of this editor's take discussion. Now, moving forward, it is very much clear. They want their own domestic industry to grow. Our auto industry is definitely facing all those challenges with EV vehicles coming into play. US also, another sticky point is US wants a comprehensive trade deal where they can dictate the terms that whenever there is a third party agreement, Canada should be in line with US. You tell me, can we agree to that? I don't think so. Because if there are 100% tariffs on EV vehicles from China, we want to build our relationship with China. Where are we looking at growth? Where are we looking at growth? It's only China and India, with due respect. Japan, as much as is the fifth, it's in the top five there, but Japan is on the decline. It's not going to grow. The two countries that are going to grow are China and India. And currently, there is no deal with India as well. As much as, yes, they are trying hard to have deal, but there's no deal. President Trump, didn't go to, I mean, the Quad, which was formed primarily India, US, Japan, and Australia. Where is Quad? No Quad summits happening. I mean, the Quad was almost dead. It's over. Well, so right now here we have the India and US relations. I know there's a G20 summit happening, the finance minister summit happening right now, and Nirmala Sitharaman, India's finance minister, is attending the G20 finance minister summit. But I think so. I think so. Indian Prime Minister Modi will also come to the G20 summit. And if my sources are telling me right, I think no other media knows this. I think the dates are set second week of December, when Prime Minister Modi will be coming to Canada. That's the date I have for Canada as well. I don't think so any other media has these dates. This is exclusive for at Ymedia. I'm just discussing this. Second week, Prime Minister Modi will be here, and then he'll go to the G20 summit. This is a schedule right now. But then with Trump, anything can change any minute now. So Canada cannot abide with these terms that yes, anytime you do a third party country. I share the concerns which USA has. I share the concerns that the dumping of steel from China, which comes over here, and then we could send our steel there. Jameson Greer also highlighted this point in his interview with Rosemary Barden. But I think the issue at heart is US wants, whether it's steel, whether it's aluminum, whether it's EV vehicles. So it's not just the trade policy, it's also when US is using trade as a political tool for political or geopolitical things. So our foreign policy, that's what you heard that press conference. That's what Prime Minister Carney clearly said. It's one thing to do put tariffs against any other country, but it's a completely different thing to be told by US and you do it this way. And I think US wants. Yeah, now their question is, okay, then what are we talking here? North America's comprehensive deal. So US says, okay, you look. They have been very clearly saying this, that yes, I was listening on Fox, the other day. They said, if it wasn't for US, Canada would have been invaded by any other country right now. So yeah, you tell me. I don't think so. Actually, this is at the heart of the discussion. This is at the heart. This is, I would say, the root cause of, because you asked an early question, how did we end up here? This is what we need to understand. And I think from here on, there are two separate ways. If you ask me, Canada, the rupture, I would say with due respect, I'm saying the rupture, there will be a rupture. There'll be a complete rupture, not in terms of trade, but a political rupture. Canada has to chart its own course. I have given this slogan. I raised this on Economic Club of Canada. I've discussed this in many forums, Empire Club of Canada, Economic Club of Canada, Toronto Board of Trade, many of the downtown meetings that I go. And this discussion was there done on the panel as well. Bob Ray was there, the other leaders. They liked this. They said, yeah, you're right. I mean, this discussion was done there on the panel. So I've raised a slogan, which we're going to, that'll be the theme of our Y Media Awards also this year. Canada, a global power. So we have to chart our own course. As much as we cannot really, we can't cut the cord for trade. We will be continuously doing trade with US. That's our major trading partner in terms of imports and exports. We need US for our growth, but we definitely need other countries for our growth. We have to chart our own course, and we can't be dictated by any other country, even US for that matter. Yeah, please, your comments.
Excellent, excellent points. Now, please tell us about Canada's trade relationship with India. That's also making headlines, and you are there at most of these events. And please tell us what's taking place on ground zero.
Yeah, I think when the G summit finished, I know the reporters were asking, the reporters would ask other question, why Prime Minister Carney didn't get a meeting with President Trump. My question to them was very clear. I wanted to ask a simple question that, and our colleague Shubi, he asked them. I think the trade deal is almost getting there, and I think we will be wrapping up the trade deal by later this year or maybe early next year. So the deal is almost done. They're just working on the nitty-gritties, and we have, in a short span of a couple of months, you had three cabinet ministers, Minister Piyush Goyal, Minister for Commerce, Minister for Finance, Nirmala Sitharaman, and then we have Minister Hardeep Puri, who's the Petroleum and Energy Minister here. Tim Hodgson, our Energy Minister, was there. Our Prime Minister Mark Carney was there in India. Our International Minister of Trade, Maninder Sidhu, he's leading a delegation there in India. So I think as far as on this side, my sources are telling me, again, I haven't seen this news anywhere in any other media, but my sources are telling me Prime Minister Mark Carney will go to India before Modi comes over here. And initially I thought the trade deal we announced when Prime Minister Modi, I still think that way. This is my overall conclusion, that I still think. But on the Canadian side, my sources are telling me Prime Minister Mark Carney could go to India and the trade deal would be announced there. I said, okay, I'm not hearing this from the Indian side. This is from the Canadian side, my sources are telling me. I said, fine. So, but anyways, either way, trade deal is announced there or announced here. Prime Minister Mark Carney goes there or not. Modi comes here. So those are all the details that we'll witness shortly. But in the next, I think the next 4 to 6 months are key in Canada and India relation, the next 4 to 6 months. Of course, there is an issue, the Hardeep Nijjar killing, issue, that sparked an outrage in Canada. Our former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he went on the floor of the Parliament, and we had that issue. But I think that's now going to be on the back burner. Why? Because I hear this from both sides. Whenever I'm talking off the air and talking to my sources, I hear this from both sides. Nothing can stop the Canada-India trade deal. Nothing can stop. The relations are going to get stronger from here on. And like I'll give you another example. The chemistry is amazing. If I can go back on Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, the finance minister, and Canada's finance minister, François-Philippe Champagne. Yesterday, when I met both of them, I saw the chemistry, but very few people would know this. When François-Philippe Champagne initially joined the cabinet, that was as the trade minister, not as a finance minister. And when Nirmala Sitharaman joined the cabinet in India, she was the Minister of Commerce, which the portfolio for Piyush Goyal right now. So Nirmala Sitharaman has served as the Commerce Minister, and at that time, Minister François-Philippe Champagne was the Trade Minister. So they were meeting there as Commerce and Trade Ministers there. So they know each other. There has been a chemistry. Of course, Nirmala Sitharaman then became the Finance Minister. I think she's the longest serving Finance Minister. She's the longest serving Finance Minister for India has ever had, Nirmala Sitharaman. And then for François-Philippe Champagne, I think the longest serving in Canada Finance Minister, he has to serve as almost 1.5 decades. The record is 15 years. So he'll get there. But what I'm saying is, as a trade ministers, they work together. As finance ministers, wherever there is a G20 finance ministers meeting, they're together. They're here in Canada together, and they're there together, in US as well for the finance minister G20 meeting. And if I'm correctly remembering, they were together in South Africa at the G20 finance ministers meeting. They were together in Indonesia. Where else was it? Brazil had the G20 summit, and India had the G20 summit. So they're all there together at the G20 summits. They're meeting as finance ministers, G20 summits. So India and Canada, from finance minister standpoint of view, from the prime minister standpoint of view, two things I'll quickly mention in the interest of time. Prime Minister Modi mentions the Davos speech and acknowledges what a great speech, and he had so many things to say. How often would you think an Indian Prime Minister mentioning the speech of a Canadian Prime Minister and praising it? Prime Minister Mark Carney goes to Australia and he was asked, how was it with Prime Minister Modi? He could have just said, oh, it was great, we're doing a trade deal. No, he's talking about his work ethics. Prime Minister Modi is doing this, that, and he goes at length to talk great things about Prime Minister Modi. Of course, he would think that yes, somebody in India could watch this. But he could have just said, "Oh, great, it's nice." Nobody would have objected to that. So the chemistry between the prime ministers, the chemistry that I saw between the trade ministers, I mean, International Trade Minister Maninder Sidhu and India's minister, and I see the chemistry between the finance minister, the chemistry between Canada's energy minister Tim Hodgson and Hardeep Puri. So I think everything is in line, and Canada and India both stand to gain. To your earlier point, when you said the trade war between US, you're absolutely right. There are no winners over here. But Canada-India trade deal, I think both the countries are marching ahead, and that's their plan A now. Yesterday, when I was talking to them, one of the things, and an interesting thing I'll tell you over here. And if when I entered this room, the reception in the Central Hotel was the other side. So we had a room there, and you see a little bit, the ambassador in the background. So ambassador, he was about to introduce me because I've never met Minister Nirmala Sitharaman, India's finance minister. So the ambassador, he took me, and he was about to, in that area, he was about to introduce me to India's finance minister. But on the way, there was François-Philippe Champagne there. And, oh, hi, how are you? This, that, oh, this. And then Minister Champagne, he takes me. I mean, it was our ambassador, Dinesh Patnaik, who was supposed to introduce me. And here it is, look at the chemistry. That's what I'm talking about, the chemistry here. So Canada's finance minister, Champagne, he says, okay, he and takes me and introduces me. Oh, meet my friend from Ymedia, this, that, from Ymedia. So the ambassador didn't even have to introduce me, and I met Minister Rita Saman. So, and then Minister Champagne was saying, great, Minister Sitharaman, before going to US, she's coming over here. So he was again and again underlying this thing that India's finance minister, she's here in Canada before going to states. So what I'm witnessing here is that sort of chemistry. And as I told you earlier, before going to the G20 summit, Prime Minister Modi, 2 days he could be here. That's my sources are telling me. So I see a great chemistry right now. Of course, things things could be a little bit challenging because there is a trial happening. There are 4 people currently, arrested of a Canadian being shot at a Canadian soil. So there are allegations against India, and there is a trial that was there in US as well, and that will come out in November. Let's see how that plays out. So India, there are allegations against India in US. That was just a plot. It didn't actually materialize. But here, a Canadian was shot dead, and now and not many of the mainstream media are discussing. I don't know whether we should discuss, but since we're talking Canada and the trade deals, it's all connected. I mean, the security protocol, the security aspect, and the trade aspect, they're connected. They're pretty much connected. So I'm talking about this as well. Not You won't see this. There was another person, when Hardeep Nijjar was shot dead in June. After that, Prime Minister Trudeau, he went for the G20 summit in India. He comes back. He goes on the parliament floor. He says there are allegations against India, but not many people know this. There was another Canadian, another person shot dead in Winnipeg in September. And there are allegations that the same group who shot dead Hardeep Nijjar, that same group killed that Indian in Winnipeg as well. And then RCMP is investigating that as well. So I'm sure it's not just one. It's not just one. There are 2 murders. So not the mainstream media, I mean, whatever, they're not talking about this, but I know that there are allegations for a fact that person was shot dead in Winnipeg in September. So things then, I mean, was it India? Was it their own internal gang war? I don't know. I can't say. I don't want to be the judge over here, but there are allegations against India, not just one. But I'll say media won't say that. I'll say two murders of 2 allegations. So let's see how that plays out. But my sense is that our Prime Minister Mark Carney and India's Prime Minister Modi say, okay, we will box this. And you know what? I suggested this to every single cabinet minister. Every single cabinet minister who came on our show, I told them, box this. This is very serious. If at all India has done this, India must be held accountable. But you can compartmentalize this issue and carry on with the trade thing. This issue cannot hold 2 countries hostage to any further trade talks. This was my viewpoint then. Yeah. Thank you so much. It's always great being with you, Ramona ji, at an editor's take, from Canada to Canada, US to provincial politics. I think we've covered quite a lot, but hopefully there is lots more to cover. I know there's lots more to cover, but maybe in our next episode of Editor's Take. So stay tuned with Ymedia. Keep watching Channel Y. Keep watching Y Plus. Stay tuned with Radio Y FM 105.9. Thank you so much, Ramona ji.
Thank you.
Thank you.